years ago, my husband and I were searching for a new Catholic parish that I'm even talking so excited. For a new Catholic parish that welcomed everyone and gave all parishioners opportunities to be involved in church programs, liturgies, and service organizations. So we left our former church and did some church shopping, and we began worshiping in a newly built school at Blessed Teresa of Calcutta Parish in Limerick. We found out that the new church was going to be built in the next several years. Father Paul Brandt, our pastor and today's speaker, coordinated the events to build our church with creative architecture ideas and very successful fundraising strategies. What makes our church unique is that we incorporated many elements of former Catholic churches in the Philadelphia Archdiocese that had closed, such as the altar from St. Boniface's, stained glass windows from many of the parishes who had been built in the late 19th and early 20th century, and Stations of the Cross and artwork that had been pushed aside as the church is closed. Our church is going to be celebrating its 3rd year anniversary in October, and our parish has grown from 1,800 families before the church was built to right now over 3,000 families. And much of that was due to Father Brandt's leadership and his beliefs that we as parishioners were vital parts of the Blessed Teresa Parish community. Father Brandt has become very close to our family. He officiated at the wedding of my daughter and her husband 2 years ago, and he baptized our granddaughter Sloan 1 year ago next month. I'm really honored to have him here at Christopher Dock to talk about his experiences this past weekend during the celebration of the visit of Pope Francis in Philadelphia. Please welcome my pastor, Father Brandt.
Thank you, Mrs. Grega. As much as Mrs. Grega has explained the things I've done at Blessed Teresa, I've been there for just a little over 9 years, but 19 years before that I spent in high school. I'm in high school ministry, so it feels very comfortable coming back to the high school environment here at Christopher Dock, and certainly appreciate the invitation to be here with you. Yes, of course, this last week has been pretty consuming in the area with the reality of Pope Francis having come to Philadelphia. And so it's been very busy for the people that I work with, and for myself, as much as being busy. It's also exciting because Pope Francis not only is just the head of the Catholic Church, but an extremely powerful and impressive public figure. And because of that, he stirs the hearts of many people, and his message and his teaching is very, very profound. Some of the things about Pope Francis which are kind of unique is the fact that he's the first Pope from the first American Pope. Now, many times, Catholics might have thought when you talk about an American Pope, someone from the United States, but the reality is, it's not really someone just from the United States, but South America is included in that, and Pope Francis had come from Buenos Aires, Argentina, where he was the head of the Catholic Church there in that city. He was the cardinal in charge of that, and his name by baptism was Mario Bergoglio, sounding as if it's more of an Italian name than a Spanish name, which is true, because his grandparents were born in Italy, and they emigrated from Italy to Argentina, where his parents lived, and obviously where he was born as a young man. As he was growing up, he went to a technical school, and of course education in that part of the world is a little bit different than ours, particularly in the beginning of the 20th century when he was educated, and he became a chemical technician. So he went to a technical school, became a chemical technician, and worked for many, many years in laboratories and so forth, doing that work as a chemical technician. Also, during that time, he worked as a janitor sweeping floors, and he was a bouncer in a nightclub. And so when you look at this man today at 78 years old, head of the Catholic Church, you don't always realize that you're looking at a man who formerly, in his resume, dossier, has a bouncer in a nightclub as part of his history. But it really does talk a little bit about who he is. After he was a chemical technician for a while, he decided that he was going to join the seminary to be ordained a priest. And Pope Francis was ordained as a Jesuit priest. Now, priests, as you would know them, are basically two different types. You can have a diocesan priest or a religious community priest. And so I'm a diocesan priest, which means I'm attached to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And the Archdiocese of Philadelphia includes this area here in Montgomery County. It includes all of Philadelphia County, Delaware County, Bucks County, Montgomery County, and Chester County. It's a large geographic area. And so for my entire life then, I will be assigned within that geographic area. Pope Francis became a Jesuit. Now, Jesuits are a type of religious communities, and there's a lot of different religious communities of priests. You have the Jesuits, of which Pope Francis is, that run St. Joseph University. You can have the Augustinians, who run Villanova University. You can have the Oblates of St. Francis de Sales, who runs De Sales University. So a lot of religious communities of priests are in education, but also do pastoral work in parishes and so forth. So Pope Francis joined the Jesuits. He had come in contact with them as a young man when he was in Buenos Aires, and he joined them. And so after his ordination, he became a chemistry teacher in high school because the religious community, the Jesuits, were running different high schools in Argentina at the time. He ultimately realized, when they realized his gifts and his talents and so forth, they elected him to run all of the Jesuits in Argentina. He was their provincial superior. He was in charge of everything that they would do. And ultimately, in 2001, Pope John Paul II named him a cardinal. That would mean that he was the highest level of the church. And so in the levels of the church, you have deacons, which serve the needs of the church. You would have priests, which would be myself, or you would have bishops. And a bishop can be a bishop, a cardinal, but also the Pope. It's the highest level. One of the Pope's titles is Bishop of Rome. And so therefore he is a bishop, elevated and elected to the position of being a pope, but the cardinal is also someone who is a bishop, but has been elevated to a different title within the governance of the church, locally and universally within the work of the Vatican. Some of the things leading up to Pope Francis's election and why he needed to be elected was because of the resignation of Pope Benedict, who was his predecessor. When Pope Benedict announced that he was resigning the position, it was amazing because it had been 500-600 years since a pope ever resigned his position. It was always believed that there could only be one pope. The church has had a history at times when there was conflict in the church, and there were two different popes elected by two different groups of people. That was a controversial time in the life of the church, so the church never wanted to revisit that again. So it was always believed there could only ever be one pope. And then all of a sudden, Benedict realized that his health was declining, he was getting older, and he could no longer carry out that role of being the pope in the church, so he decided to resign. So when he resigned, the church didn't have a pope, and so they had to go through that process of electing a pope. Before we move on to that, this is a picture of Pope Francis taken 2 years ago in St. Peter's Square, right in front. You see the building there to your right. That is the side of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican in Rome. And so right out in front of St. Peter's is a large piazza. Every Wednesday, the Holy Father has a public audience. And so he has a public audience with hundreds of thousands of people that are there. He gives a message to them, and he drives around in this Pope-mobile that he's in, and he greets people and he kisses babies, similar to what he had done in Philadelphia just over this past weekend. And obviously people have the opportunities to take pictures and so forth. And so the hundreds of thousands of people there have an opportunity to get somewhat close to him. So I had this opportunity to take this picture back in 2013, right there in St. Peter's Square, next to the Basilica. If you've ever looked at the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome, it has a colonnade that comes out around it, which is magnificent, and it has statues all on the top. You see the statues over on the left-hand side of the top? They're the ones, and you see the columns underneath it. That goes out all the way around the front of the piazza there. And it actually, because often the church is referred to as a mother church, as a nurturing church, they are the arms that welcome all of the people who come to the Vatican. It's that image of trying to draw people closer to the church by that colonnade that goes around St. Peter's Square. So So that's there, St. Peter's. This is the election of Pope Francis. Who can tell me what this room is that the picture's taken in? Anybody know? Can anyone raise their hand? Yes. Sistine Chapel. Very good. Exactly. As you see on either side, the cardinals are all lined up in their voting booths and so forth. And that table, which is right to the left of the Pope behind him, is actually where the voting box is. And when the conclave begins, they're all lined up into this Sistine Chapel. It is only the cardinals of the church who are under the age of 80 that are allowed to vote for the Pope. Technically, anyone who's ordained a priest can be elected. But most likely, it's always someone who's taken from this room, which usually is a cardinal. And so they line up here, and in the process of electing Pope Francis, the cardinals came to Rome, and they spent 2 weeks in meetings talking about what the church needed in its next leader. What are the qualities we need? Where does the church need to go? What are some of the things that needs to be addressed in the Catholic Church? Who is the person we need to be able to perform that work? And so they spent weeks figuring out what it is that they wanted to do. And so once they get into this scenario, there was about 120 of them here in the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel have these magnificent pieces of art made by Michelangelo back in the middle centuries and so forth. The image behind the Pope is his rendering of the Last Judgment, those that would go down to hell and those that are going to heaven. And in the ceiling, which you can't see real clearly here, is actually his image of creation. You might remember seeing a picture of a man and two men touching fingers like this. The one man is God and the other man is Adam, and it's that infusion of life given by God to Adam, which is in the image up on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was a remarkable, firstly, he was brilliant, but a remarkable artist. And as an artist, of course, he had his idea of how things were supposed to look. And so he painted this magnificently, and of course he figured at creation and the Last Judgment, it's all about being human. And so he painted these great human images, and he didn't want to be bothered with clothes. So he painted them all absolutely naked. Well, realizing that that might be a distraction for some people, other artists came in later. The popes made sure that they came in and they painted clouds and veils and so forth in appropriate places. But Michelangelo wanted everybody to be naked, but that got changed and so forth. And so, again, you can see as more closely some of the clouds and veils and so forth are put in certain places. So when they gathered here, the 120 cardinals, they actually vote 2 times a day. And they can discuss and they have things to say and they go back and forth about, and then obviously it's typical of any type of election. You know, here when we vote for the president, we have a primary which cuts down the field, and then we have the finals and so forth. So they actually would have voted 5 times to cut down the fields to find out where the most popular person or the person we felt was best to be able to serve the church. And it took them 5 votes. 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. And eventually it was on March 13th, 2013, at the 5th vote of this conclave, that it elected Pope Francis as the next pope for the church. It was actually quite surprising. It was probably more surprising to him than anyone else. But he does admit that during this process of the conclave, he realized it was looking as if he was actually going to be elected to be the Pope. And so that's where he started thinking about if he had to choose a name, what name would he choose? So all popes choose names that they would be known by. And so in a history which probably not many people here are old enough to realize, but in the early 60s, there was Pope John the 23rd, and then he was followed by Pope Paul VI. And then in the late 70s, the Pope was elected, and he really admired the work of Pope John and Pope Paul. So he took the name John Paul I, And then the Pope who was elected after him, which was only a month later because Pope John Paul I died within 36 days, he was elected and he wanted to continue the work of Pope John Paul I, and so he took the name of Pope John Paul II. So then when Pope Benedict was elected, obviously in the lines of all the popes, Pope Benedict, there had been a Pope Benedict XV, he wanted the name Benedict, and so he was given 16. So when Pope Francis was elected, he wanted, and we hear from him all the time, his wonderful concern for the needs of the poor and the downtrodden and the outcast and so forth. And St. Francis of Assisi was known for that type of ministry throughout his entire life. And so Pope Francis wanted to take that name of Francis in modeling his life and his ministry after that of St. Francis of Assisi. I find that because St. Francis of Assisi is such a renowned saint within the church that no pope had ever taken his name before. And Pope Francis will only go by Pope Francis, not Pope Francis I, until there is a Pope Francis II. Another interesting point is that when you talk about a pope taking a name for the first time, particularly a common name, it wasn't since 914 when Pope Lando was elected. Who took that name, really? But the Pope Lando was elected in 913. That was the last time a pope took it was the first one to pick a name. So it was unusual to have gone that long, from 915 to 2013, to be able to have somebody pick a name for the first time. They've always modeled over different names of people that have been before them. So here we have, this is an interesting concept too, because this is a picture taken before the world even knew who Pope Francis was. The world still did not know who was elected as the new Holy Father. I also think, interestingly enough, with this picture, if you see the man standing you're looking at the Pope to his right, he's holding a brocaded stole that he'd wear over his shoulder. It was very common for the Pope to wear that stole. And when you see other popes the day of their election, they greet the world wearing this stole. The histories of popes can have a lot of accessories that they would wear. There would be fur, there would be velvet and jewels and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is that when Pope Francis went to meet the entire world, he wore exactly what he has on in this picture, just his white cassock. He didn't want anything else. That man carried that stole the rest of the day, and it was never used. Because the Pope did not want things that were elaborate or ornate. He wanted things to be simple and plain. And so therefore, it's interesting because you'll see this guy in another picture later on, because he was just with the Pope this weekend here in Philadelphia. It is rumored that when the Pope was leaving the Sistine Chapel, he looked at some of his brother cardinals and said to them, "You might regret this." And certainly the work that he's had to do in changing a lot of the things within the Vatican and around the world and so forth is one of those things that some of them were not always real comfortable with, because some of them lost the jobs that they had since he was elected Pope, because he wanted other people in to do the work that they were asking him to do. One of the things, as I said, about his simplicity is that the Pope, being the head of the Vatican, which is an independent country, and of course the head of the Catholic Church, has elaborate papal apartments that have been designed and decorated for centuries to house the Pope. This is where he would live, this is where he'd have his offices and so forth. They're elaborate, they're very wealthy, and all those types of things right off of the wing where the Sistine Chapel is. When Pope Francis was elected, he chose not to live in those apartments. He decided that he was going to go to an apartment building called the Domus Sanctae Santa Marta, which is an apartment building for just any of the priests that worked in the Vatican. And so he gave up his papal apartments where he would live by himself, be waited on hand and foot, but he wanted to just live with the rest of the guys. So he has an apartment in this apartment building that all the other priests work on and live in. And when they go downstairs to have breakfast or lunch or dinner, and he's having breakfast, lunch, or dinner, he simply sits and eats with them. Some of you might have been familiar to see the images of the Swiss Guard. They're very ornately dressed with colorful costumes and so forth that guard the Pope when he's there in the Vatican. They only wear those uniforms in the Vatican, but they're also with him wherever he travels. And some of the Swiss Guard was with him here in Philadelphia just over the weekend. But when he was in his apartment one night, shortly after his elevation to being a Pope, he was hungry. And so he was making himself a snack. And of course, as tradition, the Swiss Guard was standing right outside the door of his apartment. And he opened the door and he said to the young man there, he says, "You hungry? Want something to eat?" So it's just very human for him to offer to make a snack for the guard who was there outside of his room. One of the things too is that you can't see it real clearly here, but often the Pope would wear red shoes, red slippers almost. And when the Pope was coming from Buenos Aires to Rome for this conclave, he had a buddy down there. He said to him, "Your Eminence," he says, "you can't wear those shoes to the Vatican for the conclave. They're a mess." And so his buddy gave him a new pair of brown shoes. And so when he was elected Pope, they said to him, "Well, Your Holiness, you need to wear the red shoes." He says, "I just got these brand new brown shoes. I'll wear these. These are fine." And so he's been known to wear what he wants to, no matter how simple it might be. Let me continue here. This is a picture taken, I actually took this picture on Saturday at the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul in Philadelphia. One of the things I wanted to mention here, do you see, see the guy standing here with the red cassock on? He was the guy that was in the picture of the conclave carrying that stole. But you see behind the Holy Father, there's a large chair there. And that's a chair you see in the cathedral. And it's in the cathedral because the Latin word for chair is cathedra, and that's where the word cathedral comes from. We might often hear, even in civil government, that someplace is the seat of the county, or the county seat, which is the head of the county. Norristown is the county seat of Montgomery County. Technically, that is also the seat for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. It is the chair in which Archbishop Chaput sits in. He's the head of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And so the word cathedra is the word for chair, which also translates into cathedral. This is another picture of the Pope in the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul on Saturday. And he is carrying the staff, which is called the crozier. It is the image of a shepherd shepherding his sheep. And so that is why a bishop carries that crozier, because of the fact that his role of shepherding is important. And certainly Pope Francis takes that very seriously. The hat that he's wearing is indicative of a bishop also too, that's called a mitre. And though you can't see it here, you saw it when he wore his cassock, that cross that was in front of him, that was his pectoral cross, which is another symbol of the bishop. This picture was taken on Sunday at the Art Museum on Ben Franklin Parkway, as the crowds were gathering, again in the Pope Mobile that he was there, and that would be bulletproof glass that would be surrounding him with the sides that are open. There's another closer picture here as he's gathering the people. If anyone had watched the telecast of the different celebrations that took place, civil and religious, over the past couple days with the Holy Father, you see this young man sitting behind him. He's his interpreter. He actually because the Holy Father, his native language is Spanish, and he can speak Italian from having been in Rome, but he finds English rather difficult to feel comfortable in translating. So the young man sitting there to the back always was speaking to the Pope, telling him what people were saying in English, and then translating back what the Pope had to say to them. And that was it. Okay. So when the Pope was here over the past couple days, he certainly had a great amount of energy to do what he was doing. He's 78 years old, and uniquely enough too, for as busy as he was, he actually only has one lung. At 21, he suffered a very serious case of pneumonia, which required that his lung be removed at a very young age. But still, with only one lung, he's able to take on all of the work that he was able to do. Some of the things that he already has done as the Pope and so forth, that he worked negotiating the relationship between the United States and Cuba, which we know has become part of our country's interest over the last several years and so forth about working on neutralizing the relationship there with us and the Cuban government. How about any questions? How about any questions? Any questions about anything I said, anything? If you, and how many people watched any of the stuff that went on over the weekend and so forth with the Pope being here? Okay. How about something you saw and you didn't understand? Not that I can answer every question, trust me. But does anybody have any questions? Yes. Sure.
When they're in the conclave there, what language are they speaking that they all understand?
It's similar like the United Nations. They have those great little, not teleprompters, but I mean, they have those audio connections that translates so that everybody can hear in the language that they're familiar with. Great. The question was, what language do they speak there in the conclave? Most of the common language there would be Italian, because they're in Italy and so forth. And it would be, for those that have spent a lot of time there, it would be the common language that they would understand. But they do have, just to make sure everybody does understand exactly what's being said, they do have those audio editions there that people can translate for them. They can understand that.
Can you share how close you were to the Pope and how it made you feel?
Oh, yeah. I was telling Mrs. Grega, I said that in the cathedral is a place I was ordained 31 years ago, and I'm there several times a year for different events. And as the group of priests, we must have had like 400 or 500 priests, were processed in and we took our seats. And it's typical like that, you're not really sure exactly where you're going to be sitting and who's going to be behind you, who's going to be in front of you, if you can even see anything. And there are many times I've been to the cathedral where I was put in a seat that I barely couldn't see anything. But when I got to the cathedral on Saturday and went into this procession and sat down and turned around, I was right there in the middle of the sanctuary. And so the Holy Father came up and he bowed to the altar and he would incense the altar. And there was an image of the Holy Family, because of the World Meeting of Families, huge picture, 6 by 6 feet, excuse me. And he was incensing that. So as I'm standing here, the picture is right next to me. He walked right up, he must have been like 4 feet from me. And he was incensing it. And I was telling Mrs. Grega, I said it was amazing, the feeling that someone who has such a great impact on the world and such a holy man and so forth was that close to me. And again, whenever you're trying to get to a celebrity, you usually have to go after them. It was fortunate. I just had to stand there and he came to me. But it was really a very, very powerful experience to be able to have him come that close to me and so forth and be able to have had a good seat to be able to see the... So I took some of those pictures that were there and things like that. So. How about any other questions? Oh, yes?
There ever going to be a Pope in North America? North America?
Well, there's always been a lot of talk about that. The question is, would there be a Pope coming from North America? There could be. North America would also consider Canada and so forth. But as I said, the cardinals, most of the cardinals in North America do come from the United States. And probably the cardinals that are most impacted at this time are Cardinal World, who's down in Washington, and Cardinal, the guy from Boston, but I can't remember his name. Yeah. Dolan is in New York. He is a character. And he's very, very popular that way and so forth. I don't know if in governance of the church that he would be up there in the top ranks and so forth. Right, exactly. But he is a character. Any other questions? Yes?
If you say Holy Father, do you believe that he is holy?
Do I believe he's holy? Yes, I do. I really do believe he's holy. Well, it will be interesting, and you guys will be young enough to see this, that of course when Pope John Paul II had died, and many people would have known him, he was in Philadelphia in 1979, similar to this type of thing, he now has become a saint of the church, which has been designated that he has had miracles attributed to his intercession, and so therefore indicating a level of holiness. I wouldn't be surprised if someday Pope Francis isn't put up for canonization and therefore have miracles take place through his intercession also too, because of his great ministry, and I do believe his holiness. Yes. Oh, yes.
Did Pope Francis ever suspect that one day he would be the Pope?
I know the question is, did Pope Francis ever suspect one day that he would be the Pope? I would seriously doubt that, to tell you the truth. I don't think he ever really expected to leave Buenos Aires. Even to be elevated to being a cardinal in Buenos Aires, I think was more distracting to him because it had more of an administrative responsibility, and he really just wanted to work with people. I mean, again, he's the type of person that would ride the buses and the subways with the normal people and would minister to the homeless, and that is really where he gets his energy from. So I think even making him a cardinal maybe a little bit too much administration for him. So I don't think he ever really would think of that, become a pope. Oh, okay, one more. I'm sorry, what? Did I attend both days? Yes. I was there Saturday, and I was there on Sunday also too, and it was amazing. Which one was, well, Saturday was better for me because he came right up to me 4 feet away, so I had to say hands down. There were a whole lot more people there on Sunday, and I was not as close to him, so Saturday would have to have been better for me. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.
I was inspired by his words, by his visits, and I've been inspired by Pope Francis' example of Christ. You know, there was a question about his holiness, and one picture stands out in my mind where he stopped the car at the airport and he got out and he laid hands on a boy in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy. And to me, that is an example of beauty and holiness that he is inspiring the world to live up to Christ's example. Seniors, please stay after for talk about senior experience. The rest of you, class of
3 benches, and I only need seniors who do not have Kingdom Living now. If you do not have Kingdom Living, this is who I need. Sit in the front 3 benches. If you have Kingdom Living, you already got your stuff, and you can go back to class. Just the seniors who do not have Kingdom Living.
I was going to get that.